Aloha. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I don't know about you, but I'm really excited about this subject matter. So I'm really glad to see so many people here with us. My name is Elise. I'm the Director of Marketing here at the Maui Ocean Center, and I have the great honor of introducing our guest speaker. But before we get started, I wanted to go over some of the format for this evening. We're going to begin the talk now, but then around 6:45, 6:50, we'll stop to do some Q&A. So if you can keep your questions till then, that would be much appreciated. And with that, I will introduce Eden Zhang, who joined Oceanwide Science Institute in March 2014 as a research specialist. Her focus is on processing and analyzing acoustic data, scientific diving, assisting in the coordination of field efforts, and marine mammal vessel-based surveys. She has been involved with projects that involve whales, dolphins, fish, marine invertebrates, and effects of anthropogenic noise in the marine environment. Eden Zhang holds a BA in Human Communication and participated in University of Hawaii's Marine Option Program. In addition to OSI, Eden is the Maui Marine Mammal Response Network Assistant for NOAA Fisheries and has held various positions with private, state, and federal organizations in animal husbandry, scientific diving, and protected resource management. Tonight, she will be sharing with us on how Oceanwide Science Institute uses sound to study the marine environment. OSI is currently involved in and around Maui, investigating the ways in which spinner dolphins and humpback whales utilize different areas of Maui Nui. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Eden. Mahalo.
All right. Thank you so much, Elise, and everyone here at the Maui Ocean Center for giving us such a warm welcome this evening and for setting up talks like this for our community. I think it's so important that we have a venue to share the work that we're doing here and to learn from each other. So thank you very much, Maui Ocean Center, for having us tonight. So as Elise said, my name is Eden Zhang, and I am a research specialist at Oceanwide Science Institute. Excuse me while I fiddle with this a little bit. And on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Mark Lammers, he was unable to be here this evening tonight because he is hopefully recording some Rizzo dolphins off the California coast. So that is a very high priority species for us to get some recordings of, so he's able to be there. Also, Anke Kugler is here tonight. She's going to be sharing with us some information about her project here in Maui. And then also Megan McEllicott, she is our master's student, and she's based on the island of Oahu, and she's doing a lot of work with the spinner dolphins as well around here in Maui. So that's the team. We also have Marcus Richter in the back too. He's one of our research specialists as well. So we're a small but mighty team. We are based here on the island of Maui up in Makawao. And so far from the ocean, but we need a break from the sun, right? So so without further ado, we'll kind of get into what we're going to be talking about tonight. And first and foremost, what is acoustic monitoring, and why is it important? Why is it relevant? And what can it teach us about the environment, the marine environment? And then we're going to talk a little bit about our research goals at OSI and some of the tools and methods that we use. Can you hear me better? Okay, sorry. I'm trying to. For someone that's in acoustics, I should be able to better at this, right? All right. I'll keep adjusting to get an optimal sound for you guys if we can do that. I appreciate it. And then we're going to move right into, once we talk about why acoustic monitoring, we're going to talk about how we use acoustics to understand cetacean behavior. And specifically, and let me define that real quick. For those of you that don't know, cetacean is really kind of that umbrella group that encompasses whales, dolphins, porpoises, things like that. So if you hear me say cetacean, it's just encompassing that group of animals. But specifically, we're going to talk about two animals that we may or may not be familiar with, but that are here in Maui Nui, and that's our spinner dolphins and humpback whales. And then finally, we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty details of humpback whale song and investigating whether or not song production is a display of fitness for the males here on the breeding grounds. So why acoustic monitoring? So traditional ways of surveying cetaceans or whales and dolphins include monitoring them from land. So just setting up land stations and documenting every time you see a surfacing. You've got vessel surveys where you're going out looking for these animals and trying to find these very small needles in a very large haystack. But that is a common way to go out there and find or determine the occurrence of animals. And then aerial surveys as well. But what if you've got, the animals are underwater. These animals can hold their breath, some of them for a very long time. It's at night. We're not out there at night. We can't see. And for human safety, what if there's a storm? Here in Maui, we've often got our small craft warnings. And then what if it's a remote location, like in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, for instance, where people aren't going there very often and there's not easy access? Or you're just having a really bad day. That guy was having a really bad day. And we've all had those out on the water, so I'm not judging. It happens. But acoustic monitoring allows us to non-invasively monitor an environment 24/7. So we're getting this more holistic understanding of these ecosystems. And in relation to cost, from those other traditional ways of surveying, it can be a little bit more cost-effective depending on what type of tools that you are using. So what can we learn from sounds in the sea? Many sounds are implicated, are implicated in many behaviors, and that can be spawning behavior. I'm surprised the Alua are not doing it right now. They may later. they're not doing their job of going on cue. Feeding behaviors, courtship behaviors, social cohesion, something that we're not going to talk about tonight, but that is very important as well. A lot of larval fish and coral species will use sounds as an orientation to find a coral reef. So sound is very integral in that process. And then sounds reveal activity at all different levels of the food web. So you've got your primary and your secondary consumers, the fish and the invertebrates, all the way up to your apex predators, the marine mammals, and that's who we're going to be talking about tonight. And then, of course, us as humans, we introduce many sounds into the marine environment, either through vessels or exploratory activities, things like that. And that is something that is a growing conservation concern, and how that noise will affect acoustically sensitive animals in the area. That's a whole nother conversation. But as I told some of you this at the beginning of this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we can talk about from the project that we've been involved in. So hopefully the conversation will continue past this evening, and we're certainly open to having lots of discussions with you guys in the future. So wanted to play a couple sounds for you that are a little bit more interesting that we might not be used to hearing. So I'm going to start off with this guy here first. All right, so does anybody know what that is? Dolphin? No, close. Yeah, it's a very weird noise, and it's what it is. It's actually a minke whale boing. Very scientific term, a boing. And this was known for many, many years as the boing fish. People did not know what this was. They heard it and just were unsure until I think it was the beginning of this century that they didn't know what it was, and they finally attributed it to the minke whale. So a very curious noise out in the ocean. And this one is my favorite. I get so excited when I hear that one. It's so weird, right? It's so weird. But that is a Weddell seal found in the Antarctic. And it is amazing that a seal can make that noise, right? Who would have known? So now we're going to talk about a little bit more sounds that we may have heard out here in our waters. Yeah, I heard it, damselfish. That's right. So if you've gotten too close to them when you're snorkeling or diving, they get a little territorial, a little defensive. They can make that noise. And then whether or not, if you've ever been in our water, I could probably say 100% have heard this sound. Yep. These are the predominant sound producers on any given, on a coral reef. And so what those are is on your left, those are snapping shrimp. And what that sound is, it's caused by a bubble that's made by the claw of the snapping shrimp. So when they're closing that, they're closing it so fast, it's a cavitation bubble that pops. And that's just that constant noise that we're hearing out there. So it's this tiny little animal creating a lot of noise. And that can actually be a little bit troublesome when we're trying to go through data because it creates such a noisy, ambient noise around other signals that we may be looking for. And then, of course, like I said, we as humans introduce sounds into the marine environment. And this one is... Sorry, I should have warned you on that one. So that is, that's the mid-frequency active sonar that is sometimes used by the Navy as well. So those are some of the sounds that we can hear when we're recording sounds in the ocean. So what our goal is when we're recording all of this data is we're trying to use naturally occurring sounds as indicators of the occurrence of marine animals in an environment. And then we're investigating the acoustic behavior of those marine marine animals to learn about the interactions they have with an ecosystem. And then we're relating those patterns of behavior with changes in the marine environment and or anthropogenic factors. So anthropogenic, just those man-made causes or noises. And our research tools, we do have an example of after the presentation. You want to come up, we've got one opened up here. But our main tool here is the Ecological Acoustic Recorder, or an ear. That's why we named it so cleverly, Ears in the Sea. You guys get it now? Yeah? Because this is what we use, the ears. And so I look a little bit different here, but that's me, and this is one of our shallow water deployments. And those shallow water deployments are typically 100 feet or less deployed on scuba. And then we also have a deep water deployment, which can go down to 1,000 meters. So those obviously more open ocean pelagic species that we're looking for. Now once we get these instruments back, these can be deployed for months, sometimes up to a year depending on battery life and what we program them to record at. Once we get all that data back and all those thousands of files, we have to then do something with it, right? We have to analyze it. So there are certain programs that we can use to automate data analysis, but oftentimes when we're looking for marine mammals, it is a manual process. So we have to go file by file and find those animals. So we're looking for signals like this. This is a software that we use called Triton. It's a MATLAB program. And it's looking, we log every time we see the occurrence of, you can see whistles in there, you see echolocation clicks, and we log that every time we see it. So it does take a while to get through all those thousands of files of data. And then we do have a small 21-foot research vessel here that we can go out and deploy these instruments, and then also do cetacean surveys that can help complement some of our acoustic data as well. And then just to give you an idea of where we've been, what we're doing, this is a map of the world of all the places that either OSI has led a project or we've been in collaboration with others that have used the ears, and whether or not they use the tools or we did the data analysis. These are projects that we've all been involved, or that we've been involved in over the years. So it really is neat to see worldwide how, what we can do and what we can learn and who we can partner with. Tonight, though, we're just going to focus on our local Maui area and talking about what current projects that we have going. So again, just the tip of the iceberg, but if you want to know about any of these projects, you can go to our website, you can talk to us afterwards, and we can talk a little bit more about what we're involved in. All right, spinner dolphins. So this is actually the work of Megan McEllicott. She's, again, our master's student with University of Hawaii over on the island of Oahu. And what we're doing with her project is we're investigating the occurrence of the spinner dolphins around Maui Nui. So just to give you a little bit of a background about the dolphins that we find in our area, Maui is pretty unique in the sense that we're set in this shallow, relatively shallow basin surrounded by very deep waters. And we typically have low sighting rates compared to the other islands. So I know those of you that are boat captains or crew and have been out on the water, you're kind of like, what do you mean low sighting rates? But compared to the Kona Coast, off Big Island, or the Waianae Coast off Oahu, we really do have relatively low sighting rates. And then we also have a low diversity of dolphins in the Maui Nui area. Cascadia a few years ago published a paper saying that they just came across 8 of the 18 known species that are to be in Hawaiian water. So again, a low diversity compared to the other islands. And then we also have a low survey effort. So the survey efforts have been focused on the other islands. So what we're hoping to do is to understand our local population a little bit better. Now, spinner dolphins, they are a small species of dolphin. They're about 4 to 7 feet in length and just about 100 to 165 pounds. And the islands that you see in pink, I know it's a little bit small here, but these islands here, these are the islands that spinner dolphins are known to live around. And that estimated population is just a little over 3,000 animals. Now, spinner dolphins, kind of to give you a sense of what they're doing and their behavioral cycles, typically at night, they're going out to feed and to forage, and they're feeding on what we call the mesopelagic layer. So this deep water layer that does this nightly migration, there's fish and squid and all sorts of animals in there, that they'll go in and they'll go offshore at night, hunt in these large groups, and feed on those animals. And then kind of in the transitory period, they're going to be socializing. That's kind of when we see those high energy behaviors. And then also during the day, we'll see them resting in these shallow bays, and that gives them a chance to recuperate, care for their young, rest, and get ready to do it all over again the next night. So the objective of this program, what we set out to answer is, in the Maui Nui area, where do they rest? Where do they eat? Because we really don't know that at all. And then other areas of importance. What other areas are they using? And then how adaptable they are to changing environmental and anthropogenic factors. So again, relating these naturally occurring sounds to what's happening in their environment, especially, with development and things like that. We want to know how adaptable they are to that. So as you saw before, dolphins, they produce clicks, echolocation clicks used for foraging. They also produce whistles. That's typically for social communication. And then they also produce what we call burst pulses, which is another form of communication. It's a little pulse sound of clicks, but we do see that in social interactions mostly. So we use these sounds as a proxy to estimate the abundance of animals in an area, or the occurrence of the animals in an area. And then again, with these autonomous recorders, we're able to capture these sounds 24/7. So we're getting a snapshot of what's going on even when we're not out there to see it. So the data that we recorded, we took 30-second recordings for every 5 minutes. Or every 5 minutes we took 30-second recordings. That sounds right? Okay. And then we manually, or we're working to Megan's working to manually analyze this data for the presence of dolphins. So each deployment, they're typically 2 to 3 months at a time. And again, tens of thousands of files that we're going through. So right now for tonight, what we've got analyzed are 3 sites along West Maui. But you can see here, she's got 8 different sites. So all the way from Honolua down to mile marker 17 near the Olawalo area. We've also got one in the mid-channel of the Maui Lanai channel. And then 2 sites over on the island of Lanai too, as we know that dolphins occur over there as well. So tonight we're going to talk specifically about Honolua, Kahili, and mile marker 17. So I'll try to, I know it's kind of small, but I'll let you know what's going on all these plots that we present tonight. So this is from Honolua Bay, and on the x-axis you're seeing the date, so that's the date of the deployment, and then on the y-axis you are seeing the percent of files with dolphin detections. As you can see here, the dolphins were there almost every day. They're utilizing the area almost every day, but you can see it's variable in how much they're using it. Some days are much higher, like that October 27th, versus some days where they're only there a small amount of time. Now this does tell us something, but if we look at it a little bit closer, we can go in and what she's been logging is when she sees clicks, whistles, and clicks and whistles. So that helps us understand what behavior they're engaged in at the time. So there is a clear pattern here in the daytime hours. And again, you see this peak between 6 and kind of 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And that would be that transitory period from when they're coming off their nighttime binging, if you will. They're going out and hunting, coming in, you see some of that social behavior, and then they're starting to quiet down as it gets a little bit later in the afternoon. And that's probably indicative of some resting behavior that we see there. There are some clicks at the nighttime, and a couple whistles as well, but we'll talk a little bit more about what that may be in a little bit. So next is Kahili. So this is off the Ka'anapali area, and you can see very different from Honolua. The dolphins are hardly ever there. So we're only seeing a handful of days where the dolphins, where we can detect them acoustically. And then when we look to see what types of sounds they're making, we see again it's the majority, there's whistles going on. So you can see it's really more of a transitory corridor for these animals. They're kind of going through onto their whatever else they're doing that day. And then mile marker 17, it's kind of a mix between the two. We've got, this one's kind of interesting. This one surprised us a little bit. You can see they're not there every day, but they're not there as little as they are at Kahili. And so when you look at this a little bit closer, very different pattern from both Kahili and from Honolulu. So you're seeing kind of the reverse of what we saw at Honolulu especially. There's somewhat of an absence in this daytime hours, but lots of activity going on at night. And when we look at that activity, it's clicks. So clicks, as I mentioned before, are indicative of a foraging behavior. So when we look at this, what that tells us is a couple of things. There is an ecological shift happening at night in the mile marker 17 area. There's some kind of prey entering the area at night, but because these are just clicks and they're not whistles, if we have enough of them, we could put them through a species classifier and get a better understanding of what animals are in the area. But because it's just clicks, we can't rule out that it's another species of dolphin. So there could be bottlenose in the area or some other species kind of exploiting whatever prey is happening. So either way, it's interesting because we're not seeing that type of activity during the day of feeding behavior or anything like that. But something's happening at night where some species of dolphin is exploiting that area for the prey, which is good. So kind of to sum it all up, there's 3 different trends in use with these recorders that we picked up. Honolulu, likely resting area, and that kind of validates probably some anecdotal information that we've had. But what's interesting about that too is we saw those clicks at night. So again, it could be a different species, not spinners in the area, so not sure what's going on there. And then Kahili, it's that transit corridor, so they're passing through as they're going on to their next mission. And then mile marker 17, possibly another species, but something definitely is changing in the environment at night. So pretty interesting to see that, just very preliminary information. But you can see acoustic data does tell us a lot. It lets us know what's going on in a different, any given area. So stay tuned for more data. Megan is plowing through that data as fast as she can, but it does take a while. So what we're going to continue to look at is variations in across seasons and across days. We're going to try to identify important areas for rest and for feeding. And then, of course, ultimately, what we'd like to do is use this data to inform management of areas of importance for our local spinner dolphins and kind of lend them a voice as well. So what I'm going to do next, save your questions for the end too, but make sure you remember them. I'm going to introduce Anke Kugler. She is a PhD student with the University of Hawaii. She works with Dr. Mark Lammers, and she's going to talk a little bit more about humpback whales and how they're using habitat around Maui. And then I'll be back up to wrap up about whale song. Thanks, Anke. Please welcome her. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Eden.
Yeah.
And hello, everyone. As Eden mentioned, I'm doing my PhD with the University of Hawaii at Manoa, but I'm actually here on Maui now because I'm studying humpback whales. So it kind of makes sense to be on Maui. And tonight, I want to talk a little about what part of my PhD research and just quickly introduce humpback whales. I'm pretty sure most of you are very familiar with them, as they're like probably one of the most characteristic animals here in Maui. And they're moderate to large baleen whales. I just noticed I should have converted it to feet. I'm really sorry. Yeah, and while they're here, I mean, we think they're here in Maui and they're pretty taken for granted, but they actually do occur globally, all around the world. But we do have discrete populations within the different ocean basins. And so we have what we call a stock, and one in the North Pacific, one in the Atlantic, one in the South Pacific, and it actually don't mix. And humpback whales, like all large whales, migrate annually between high latitude and low latitude areas. And for the humpback whales in the North Pacific, they migrate to feeding areas up here in Alaska, the Aleutians, some of Russia. And then in this winter time, they migrate to their breeding and mating grounds, for example, in Hawaii. And in the breeding grounds, like in all the breeding grounds, they produce the pretty famous humpback whale song. And it's only been sung by the males. And all males in one breeding ground, like, for example, like Hawaii or Mexico, they approximately sing the same song. And this song is complex and hierarchical. So this is a representation of the song. It's a little hard to see, but you can see like we have different individual units, and what they can be like they are different, but they kind of repeat. And because they are like so repetitive in a very specific structure, we can combine individual units into what we call phrases. And those phrases make up themes. And then all those themes together will make up one song, which is up to 20 minutes long. And let me just quickly give you an idea. I mean, probably most of you have heard it, but just get an idea. But yeah, as you have heard, probably you can even hear like there are different types of sounds, and they are kind of repetitive, and then they change to yet another type of sound. And that's what they produce all winter long, and that's what we get in our recordings all the time. And it's kind of a pain for people who don't study humpback whales, because it's kind of predominant in our recordings. And yeah, that's about Zang. I will get back to it later. But as I mentioned, here in Maui, we have our whales coming in winter, and it's kind of a big thing. And in the last breeding season, not this just the one that just passed, but the year before in 2015-16, we had our first whale sighting here off Maui in October. And when we get our first whales in Maui, it's kind of a big deal. It does make the headlines. And it's pretty normal that we get the whales in October. But then in January, it kind of made the news that the humpback whales were kind of slow to arrive in Hawaii. And people started wondering, have they maybe gone missing? Mm-hmm. It was kind of like, I mean, people who live here probably remember, it was kind of like all over the news. Where are the humpback whales? Are they missing? And people were wondering what happened. Remember, this is January. Usually in January, we start seeing a lot of whales. And they peak in February. So in January, people were like, what happened? But officials were pretty fast to say, they aren't missing. They're just late. But I looked at the data that is gathered by Sanctuary Ocean Count Project, and they go out one day every month in different islands, not here on Maui actually, but on the other islands, and on different spots, just count whales. And when I look at the numbers from the year before, we can clearly see that on all islands, Kauai, Oahu, Hawaii, in the different years, in 2016, we had less whales than the year before. So we could say, at least in those areas, the whales didn't arrive later, they just didn't arrive, or not as many, basically. So we were wondering, or basically I was wondering, did the humpback whales really go missing? And we were specifically interested in the acoustic side of it, because from the Ocean Count Project, we have to keep in mind it's only a snapshot in time. It's only one day a month. And whales move around in the islands. They could have just been in a different area that hasn't been surveyed. So we were wondering, what does the acoustic record tell us? Because we had recorders there that were recording for different projects, and we just wondered, okay, let's look for humpback whales. And can we confirm those visual observations? And what we did is, we did use data from 4 different recorders shallow water recorders off the coast of Maui. And they recorded between November and May in those 2 seasons. And we used the male song as a proxy for whale density. We basically said, okay, the more singing we hear, we assume the more whales we have. And today I'm just going to present part of the data. I'm going to present this side, and we'll later also talk a bit about this side and this side. So let's look at the data. And what we have here is what we call an RMS plot. It sounds pretty fancy, and it basically is just the representation of the amount of energy in the water, amount of acoustic energy. So it basically just tells us how loud it is. And if we look at this data from 2014-15, we can see it starts around 95 decibel and just starts picking up, peaking in February before it drops again. And this represents the migratory pattern of the humpback whales. So we have the humpback whales moving into the islands November, December. We have more whales coming in. They sing more. It's getting louder. And then we have the maximum peak in February, March, just before they start migrating back. So if we now plot the data from the next year, it basically starts out the same. It's very similar levels. Matches pretty well. But then in January, we see a big drop in acoustic energy. And from then on, it kind of remains lower for the remainder of the season. This is the whole season, and you can see it's clearly lower. So what happened? If we assume we had less acoustic energy, which translates into lower number of whales, we would now ask what happened. But we don't know. We just have the acoustic record. We can just make assumptions. But we can say just from the acoustics, they weren't just late as was predicted. And what may have happened is that they just moved to different areas that haven't been monitored either visually by the counts or even acoustically by us. And for example, penguin banks here is hardly to access, but it's a well-known humpback area. So that maybe they just hang out here. Or what could also be a possibility is that we indeed had less whales in the islands. And for the past decade or so, the population has been increasing in the North Pacific. It actually resulted in humpback whales being delisted from the endangered species list just last year, exactly 1 year ago, actually. But what it means, if the population increases, they have to spend more time feeding because the competition for the same amount of food just gets higher. And if they spend more time feeding up in the north, they may just have skipped migration or migrated later. But another possibility what we have to consider is in 2015, we had a big El Niño event in the North Pacific. And this is just a plot of the sea temperature difference from the long-term average. So if it's in the red color, it means it's been warmer than in the long-term average. And you can clearly see it's been pretty hot here, but also up in the up of Alaska. And if it gets too hot, it also means that we have less food for the whales. So, and if we have less food, then again, the whales may have to spend more time feeding because they just don't get enough food, which may result again in a shorter or skipped migration. And this has also been suggested by other areas in the world where they also saw less whales in that specific season. And they also said, well, maybe it's due to El Niño. So we were wondering, if it was due to El Niño, we should see an increase again in this past season. So I looked at the data from this year, and now I'm presenting those other two sides. And again, you can see 2015-16 season had much lower values than the year before. And if we now plot the data from this season, well, we can see it's still low. it didn't go back up again. So in summary, we can say the onset of the season is pretty similar. It's the same pattern we have, but in at least the last 2 whale seasons, we had levels that were below the year, the 2014-15 levels. And also, we didn't see a shift in migration pattern. They didn't come just late. They actually, if we go back, they actually started leaving earlier. Usually, like here, it drops late March, and here we actually see like a big drop in early mid-March. So, if we assume that this acoustic energy actually translates to whale population size, we can say that in the last 2 seasons, we did have less whales here in the Hawaiian Islands. And what we have to do is we have to continue monitoring the whales just to see maybe they just had to recover from El Nino a little bit longer, or whether there's more going on that we just don't know yet. Okay, now just briefly, I want to talk about my second project and just give a little sneak peek. And for this project, I'm actually interested in how the humpback whales are using the Maui Nui area, and whether they pretty much similar to the American spinner dolphin work. Do they use different areas for different activities? Do they prefer specific areas? Those kind of things. And for this project, we deployed 5 ears in various regions. And I also had 2 land stations here of Olowalu, and also actually at the Mount Cracker Point lookout, I think is the official name. I just call it Pali lookout.
That's what everybody calls it, don't worry.
Yeah. So, and just this little sneak peek, if we look at the RMS plots as a representation of what the whales are doing when they're singing. And this time we're not looking at the seasonal pattern, but at the day-night pattern. And here we have like midnight and just the day of the time, the hour. And for those 2 sites, Olowalu and here off the Pali, we can clearly see that singing activity drops during the day. And then starts picking up again at night for both locations. And if we go to now this location here in the middle between Maui, Lanai, and Kaolave, we actually see a completely different pattern. So we can clearly see they start singing during the day. And now I was wondering, is it just whales, those whales moving here? Or are those different whales and they just sing at different times of the day? And for that, I'm going to relate my land observations data to those acoustic recordings. And we'll look for those diurnal patterns and also seasonal patterns to see whether the usage changes during the season. And with that, we've been talking about just using the song for like different questions, but why do they actually sing? And I think Eden's going to talk a little bit about this now.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Good job. All right, thank you so much, Anke. 1 second. All right. It's a whale song. I could hear from everybody's reaction. Everybody kind of loves it. It kind of touches you in a special place just hearing that song, and they are pretty magnificent animals. I do want to let you guys know that this is the work of Dr. Mark Lammers and from Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology and, of course, Oceanwide Science Institute. Also, Dr. Adam Pack, who you may be familiar with. He's with the University of Hawaii at the Hilo campus. Dr. Mark Dikos also was involved in this project. He's with the Hawaii Association for Marine Education and Research. And then Anke has been helping with the analysis of a lot of this data. But going to be talking a little bit about their work that they've done here on Humpback Whale Song. So humpback whale breeding, Anke set it up really nicely. She kind of explained why the humpbacks are here, why they're visiting our area, but wanted to talk a little bit more about the social units that we're seeing here on the breeding grounds. So you'll see mother and calf pairs. Occasionally you'll see a male escort there as well. You have juveniles and weaned yearlings. You've got the breeding males and females and these short-term associations. So you've got these dyads of either a male to male, or a male and a male together, or a male and a female. And oftentimes those male and female associations are size associative. So that means that larger females prefer larger males. Then you've also got your competitive groups, those kind of fights that you see out in the water. And then of course, like Anke was talking about, our singers, which are only the males. It is important to note that there is a skewed sex ratio. It's about 2 to 1 here on the breeding grounds. There's about double the amount of males than there is females. And there's a promiscuous mating system with unequal male success. So some males are more successful in continuing their lineage than others. And then why it's important to kind of set all this up is because there is a high level of male aggression within those competitive groups that can lead to injury, or even there have been documented cases of deaths in these competitive groups. So displays of dominance, they are very common within these groups that we're seeing. So whale song, everybody, I mean, it's fun to think about, right? Like, why are they singing? Why are they doing it? And there's been lots of different proposed functions of song over the years. We've kind of got it here chronologically. First, it was kind of thought of a fitness display to females. Others thought it might be a stimulus to encourage the females to go into estrus. Could be a spacing mechanism amongst whales. There was a theory there for a while that it could be some kind of sonar to find females. And then kind of in the recent history, there's been talk about it's a display to other males. And then also, just last year, a paper was published about it being a lucking mechanism to attract females to a competitive arena. So amongst all of those proposed functions of song, what's really supported the most behaviorally, or some of the supporting behavioral evidence that we have for some of those functions of song, is right now there's no evidence of female attraction to singers. We do see singers joining those mom and calf associations, but again, that's the male's choice, not necessarily the female's choice. And then again, along those lines, joining whales are always other males. So other males are the ones that are joining those singers. And then interactions between the singer and the joining whale range anywhere from agonistic or aggressive to kind of affiliative. So they'll go off together. So among the proposed functions, a male-to-male display is currently the most supported behaviorally. Now, however, little is currently known about how song production varies amongst these individuals, and no direct evidence exists that song properties correlate with fitness. And that fitness can, again, when we're talking about competitive groups and things like that, that can play into this. So we set out to answer 2 basic questions. Do variations exist in the production of song units among whales that could serve as indicators of fitness? So if you remember back to Anke's slide, each song had a unit, the theme, the phrases, the themes. So we're looking at those individual units. And this is a way for the animals to potentially evaluate one another. And then if there are those variations correlated with difference in size amongst the singers? So this data was collected back in 2 consecutive breeding seasons over the 2002 and the 2003 breeding seasons. We will talk about why it's taken us so long at the end. But how it was collected, under federal permit, of course, 2 snorkelers were positioned above and toward the front of the singing whale. And recordings were made using a calibrated low-frequency hydrophone, while simultaneous video and audio recording was captured. And then distance to the whale was obtained every 30 seconds on a dive sonar and recorded on the video. So they kind of had it on a wrist and could show it to the camera there. And that was to make sure everything was aligned. And then a second calibrated video camera was used to obtain videogrammetry data to estimate the size of each whale. So to look at the data, what we did is we ran these through a algorithm to orally classify each one of those units. And we calculated the following metrics. So we were looking at duration, how long they were singing each individual unit, the peak frequency or the pitch of the unit, the source level or the amplitude of each unit, and then also the 1/3 octave band energy, which is just basically a measure of acoustic energy across the different frequencies. And then statistical analysis was performed across both the unit level and pooled across the units for each whale. And then whale sizes, like we mentioned, were estimated using underwater videogrammetry methods. If you really want to know how it was done, you can refer to Spitz et al. 2000. So one or more song cycles were obtained from each of the 14 singers. You can see from this plot here, again, sorry, I'll explain it a little bit. On the y-axis, you have the numbers of units obtained, and then across the bottom, you have each individual whale. And then up here at the top is the 12 distinct, there we go, the 12 distinct units that were captured in their analysis. So you can see some whales did sing more than other whales. And then sizes we were able to obtain sizes from 7 different whales. And those sizes ranged anywhere from 11.1 meters all the way up to 12.8 meters. Now the units considered for analysis, while we did get 12 different distinct units, because the whales sang at different amounts and we only captured certain amounts, we just looked at 8 different units for analysis. And the reason for that is that we had a large enough sample size to make statistical comparisons amongst those 8. So that's why we chose those. So the question, we're going back to that basic question, does variation exist in the production of song units amongst whales? So here you've got the 1/3 octave band analysis performed for each unit and average for each whale. So each color of these lines here is the individual whale, and then you have on the x-axis, you have the frequency bands, and then you have the amplitude or the, how loud they were singing on this end. So you can see from this, some units were produced quite consistently amongst the singers, while others had much greater variability in the terms of amplitude and energy across the frequencies. So again, looking at the duration, the pitch, and the amplitude, and comparing those amongst the singers, what we did is we took each unit type, so for instance, unit A or unit H, we took 10 of those randomly selected for each whale, and we pooled that. And then what we found from that, which was really interesting, is there are significant differences found amongst all 3 of these variables. So it's ranked basically from who is, sang the shortest to the longest and so on and so forth. But each one had a statistical significant difference in variation amongst those metrics. So the answer to our question, variation in the production of song amongst whales does exist that could potentially provide information about individual fitness for these animals to discriminate amongst one another. So the second question, are measured acoustic variations correlated with differences in size amongst the singers? So we looked again at duration, pitch, amplitude, and then we correlated them this time with the sized whales that we had. Now here what we're seeing is no correlation, interesting enough, was found in the duration or how long they were singing the units or the peak frequency, although we do see an upward trend, so perhaps with more data we might see a positive correlation. But where we did see a significant positive relationship was with that amplitude, that source level of how loud that whale was singing. So let's see. So what's interesting to note on this as well is the largest whale did rank either first or second amongst all 3 variables. So you see the largest whale here is number 1 at source level, number 1 at pitch, and number 2 on how long he's singing the units. So some acoustic variables seem to be associated, and they are associated with the singer size. So all this to say, individual variability, it does, in the production of song, exists amongst whales. Certain units are more variable than others, as we saw that between like the A and the H unit. Some whales produce longer units than others. Some are singing at higher pitches, and then some are singing louder than others. In other words, acoustic cues for discriminating amongst whales, individual whales, are present in whale song. So the largest whale sang the loudest and had the highest peak frequency. And to our knowledge, this is the first evidence of acoustic allometry in the signaling of a baleen whale. And what allometry is basically relating the size of an animal to a size of another variable with that animal. So again, this is, to our knowledge, the first evidence of that in a baleen whale. So in conclusion, humpback whale song does meet the criteria of a display that can carry information about individual fitness. So they could be using this as some way to discriminate amongst one another, trying to understand a little bit more about one another before they maybe be entering those competitive groups. So with that, I am going to just go to our acknowledgement slide. I want to thank lots of folks. All these projects have been happening over many years, and we've got some local supporters, we've got national supporters, and lots of others that just lend their time. And then pointing out right here the love of science and time. If you remember, we said that data was collected back in 2002, 2003. Unfortunately, there has been no funding for that, and there continues to be no funding for that. So it's just been a love of science and time and really dedicating our efforts to analyzing that data. But as you can see, I think there's some really cool stuff in there that we really need to explore further. So without further ado, we'll take questions now, I guess. Thanks.